Captain Elias Ward woke to the sound of something soft and rhythmic, a faint beeping that echoed like a heartbeat inside a hollow room, and for a moment he could not remember where he was or why his body felt heavy as stone. He tried to breathe deeply, but even the air tasted strange, cold, metallic, almost too clean, and when he forced his eyelids open, he saw a pale blue glow washing over him from unfamiliar walls curving like the inside of a giant shell. His vision blurred and shaped itself slowly, revealing floating screens, shimmering symbols, and tall figures moving quietly around him, their hands glowing with thin bands of light. Elias blinked twice before he realized they were not human doctors at all, but alien healers with silver masks and long, slender arms. They spoke in soft tones he didn't understand, yet their voices somehow carried an unsettling mix of fear and awe. He tried to sit up, but a sharp pain rolled across his ribs like fire waking inside his bones, forcing him back against the cushioned bed. Memories tried to push through the fog in his mind. Flashes of screaming civilians, burning soil, explosions ripping the sky apart, and his own voice shouting orders as he dragged wounded soldiers to safety. Then nothing but darkness swallowing him whole. One of the alien healers stepped closer, its mask tilting as if studying his confusion. The being touched a panel and the pod opened around him fully, releasing a breath of warm air that carried the scent of herbs and something electrically sweet. Elias frowned, realizing he was not in a human facility. The architecture, the symbols, even the faint hum vibrating through the floor all belonged to a different world. His heart pounded faster, panic crawling up his chest, and he pushed himself slightly higher despite the pain. "Where am I?" he whispered, but his voice sounded rough and dry like sandpaper scraping metal. Before any healer could answer, the doors slid open with a soft hiss and a group of armed human guards entered, their armor dusty and scratched, their expressions carrying exhaustion and relief. Behind them walked High Commander Price himself, a man Elias respected but never expected to see so far from Earth's borders. The commander's eyes softened as he approached. "You're awake, Captain," he said quietly, placing a steady hand on Elias's shoulder. "You saved us all." Elias tried to understand, but the room felt too bright, too unreal. He swallowed and shook his head weakly. "How long was I out?" he asked. 3 days, Price answered. "You were pulled from the battlefield barely alive. We brought you to the Allied medical wing because their technology could save you faster than ours." Elias opened his mouth to respond, but something shifted behind the commander, a small figure stepping into view as if trying to hide in her own shadow. She moved slowly, her hands held close to her chest, her head lowered, her long silver blue hair glowing faintly under the lights like strands of moonlit water. Her skin was smooth and pale with a soft luminescent shimmer, and her eyes, when she finally lifted them toward him, were large and bright like deep ocean glass filled with fear. She looked no older than 20 human years, yet there was a delicate, ancient beauty in her features, something fragile but mysterious. She approached with trembling steps and knelt beside the bed as if performing a sacred ritual. Elias stared in confusion, unsure whether she was another healer or someone injured needing help. But then she spoke in a soft, melodic voice that vibrated with emotion. "I am Lyra," she whispered. "I am given to you." Elias blinked, his mind failing to understand her meaning. He looked at Price for answers. The commander exhaled slowly, his face tightening. "Captain," he said carefully, "there is something you need to know about this colony's laws." Lyra lowered her head even further, her shimmering hair falling around her like a curtain of light. Elias felt a strange twist in his chest, a mix of shock, discomfort, and something protective he couldn't explain. Price continued, "Her people follow an ancient code. If someone saves their life, they owe their life in return. During the attack, you shielded her from a Varric strike. You threw her to safety before the blast hit you." Elias felt the memory crack open inside his mind, a brief flash of her terrified eyes as he shoved her behind a barrier, the explosion swallowing his senses afterward. He swallowed hard. "So what are you saying?" he breathed. Price hesitated, then answered bluntly, "She believes she belongs to you now." The words felt cold and heavy. Elias turned to Lyra, who trembled like a leaf in a storm, not daring to raise her gaze. She had been taught this her entire life, conditioned to obey or suffer. The fear in her eyes proved it. "I don't want a slave," Elias said softly, trying to lift himself again, but the pain forced him down. Lyra flinched as if she had done something wrong, her shoulders curling inward like she expected punishment. Elias stared at her fear, at the silent plea in her shimmering eyes, and something inside him shifted. Something protective, something deeply human. Before he could say another word, the medical lights flickered. A warning alarm hummed through the walls, and the alien healers exchanged tense glances. Commander Price's face darkened as he touched his earpiece, listening to a rapid transmission. Then he looked at Elias with a grim expression. "The Varric ships," he said quietly. "They've returned. And they're searching for her." The room fell silent, Lyra's breath caught, and Elias felt a chill crawl across his skin as he realized the truth. The girl kneeling beside him was not just a gift or a symbol of an old law. She was the reason the enemy had come and the reason they would come again. Lyra sat quietly in the corner of the room as if afraid her very breath might disturb the air around her. The soft glow from the medical screens painted silver light across her face, showing how young she truly looked and how much fear she tried to hide. Elias watched her from the bed, his chest tight with a feeling he couldn't explain. Part concern, part confusion, part anger at the idea that anyone could treat a living being like property. She kept her hands folded neatly on her lap, her head bowed, her long hair falling like a shimmering veil around her shoulders. Every time someone walked past her, she flinched the way a wounded animal flinches from an unfamiliar touch. It hurt Elias more than the injuries in his ribs. A human nurse brought food, but Lyra refused to eat until Elias nodded at her. Only then did she move, carefully picking up the small bowl with both hands, her fingers trembling as if afraid she would break it. Elias tried to sit up, but the pain in his side pushed him back. Still, he forced his voice to stay gentle. "You don't need my permission to eat." Lyra lowered the bowl instantly as if she had been caught doing something wrong. Her voice cracked softly. "My duty is to wait for your command, human. My life is yours." The words made Elias's stomach twist. He had seen soldiers break under torture, civilians lose homes, planets fall into chaos. But something about this one frightened girl obeying him so completely felt heavier than any battlefield he had crossed. He motioned for her to come closer. She hesitated, then rose with slow, unsure steps. When she stood beside his bed, he noticed faint glowing patterns on her arms, delicate lines that looked like constellations moving beneath her skin. "Who taught you that you have to serve someone like this?" he asked. She looked away as if the memory burned. "The Council protected me since I was a child. They kept me inside the inner shelter where I learned the law of my people. The one who saves my life becomes my life if I fail to serve. I dishonor my ancestors." Elias shook his head slowly, frustration tightening his voice. "You are not an object. You're not something they can give away." Lyra's eyes widened with panic. "Please don't reject me. If you refuse me, they will cast me out. No one will take me after I have been offered once. I will be alone with no protector, no home." Her voice broke into a trembling whisper, and Elias felt a deep ache in his chest. He reached out and placed a gentle hand on her arm. She stiffened at the touch before relaxing as if she had never been touched softly before. "I'm not rejecting you," he said quietly. "But you are not my slave. We will figure this out together." She stared at him with a fragile mix of relief and disbelief, as if kindness was a strange new world she had never walked through. Before he could speak again, the door slid open and Commander Price entered with a tight expression. He tapped a small hologram that projected above his wrist, showing strange red dots moving toward the colony border. "The Varric scouts are increasing in number," he said. "They're searching for something specific." His eyes shifted to Lyra as the implication hung heavy in the air. Lyra stepped back immediately, fear flooding her eyes like dark water. "They want me," she whispered. "They always wanted my kind. They believe our blood is the key to controlling energy beyond their reach." Elias watched her hands shake. He had seen fear before, but never like this. A fear shaped by years of hiding, of surviving, of being the last spark of something ancient and hunted. He pushed himself upright despite the pain. "You're safe here," he said firmly. "They won't touch you," but Price didn't look convinced. He folded his arms. "We don't know how they tracked her. Our scanners show bursts of energy coming from her during the attack, energy we've never seen from her species before. It's possible she triggered something." Lyra's breath caught sharply. She shook her head quickly. "I didn't mean to. I didn't even know I could do that. Sometimes when I am scared, something inside me reacts Eliasly. I cannot control it." Elias clenched his jaw. "She's not a weapon. She's a person." Price raised an eyebrow. "Tell that to the Varric. They're willing to send half their fleet to retrieve her." The room fell silent. Only the quiet hum of the medical lights filled the air. Lyra lowered her gaze to the floor, her lips trembling. If I leave, they will stop coming, she said in a broken whisper. If I surrender myself, they will spare this colony. Elias felt a surge of anger rise inside him at the thought. He reached forward and took her hand firmly, surprising her so much that her glowing eyes lifted toward him. No, he said, his voice fierce and unwavering. I'm not letting you walk into their hands. Not after everything you've been through. She looked at him with a fragile mix of hope and confusion, as if no one had ever fought for her before. A sudden tremor shook the floor beneath them. The lights flickered, alarms chimed across the hallway, and a soldier rushed to the door shouting, Captain, Commander! Varric drop pods entering the atmosphere! Lyra gasped, her knees weakening, her eyes filling with terror as the distant roar of descending ships rumbled through the colony walls. Elias tightened his grip on her hand, a protective fire burning in his chest. They're coming for her now, Price said, his voice grave. And we don't have much time. Elias looked at Lyra, then at the shaking walls around them, and he knew one thing with complete certainty. He would not let the enemy take her. No matter what it cost him, the first tremor was small, just a soft shake that made the medical lights flicker. But the second one rolled through the floor like a warning thunder, sharp enough to send a metal tray crashing to the ground. Lyra froze where she stood, her glowing eyes wide with terror, her breath coming in shallow bursts as if the very air had turned against her. Elias felt the bed vibrate beneath him and pushed himself upright with a wince, ignoring the pain clawing through his ribs. Outside the room, alarms wailed in rising waves. Soldiers' boots pounded across the corridor, and distant shouts echoed through the halls as the colony shifted into emergency mode. Commander Price barked orders into his earpiece, his face tightening with every passing second. Enemy drop pods confirmed. Multiple sites. Defensive squads responding, he said, then turned sharply toward Elias. They're coming fast, Captain. Faster than expected. Elias swung his legs over the side of the bed. His bare feet touching the cold floor, Lyra rushed forward as if afraid he would fall, her hands hovering near him but not daring to touch until he gave a small nod. Her gentle grip steadied him as he stood, her fingers trembling around his arm. You should stay here, she whispered, fear shaking every word. They will take me, I know they will. I can feel them calling, they know where I am. Elias shook his head with a stubborn fire in his eyes. No one is taking you, he said firmly. Not while I'm breathing. Another tremor struck. Deeper, louder, rattling the glass panels on the walls. A low rumble carried through the air like the growl of a beast approaching from beneath the ground. The lights dimmed, then steadied, casting long shadows across Lyra's face. Commander Price stepped closer, lowering his voice. We have to move her to a safe zone. The Varric aren't attacking the whole colony. They're targeting specific sectors. Every path they take leads straight toward this wing. Lyra stepped back as if the words were sharp blades, her hands rising to her chest as she shook her head. I didn't want this, she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. I didn't want anyone harmed because of me. Elias placed a hand gently over hers, his voice soft but unbreakable. This is not your fault. You didn't choose their cruelty, but she wasn't convinced. Her gaze darting to the floor as she whispered, if I go with them, they will stop. They always stop when they get what they want. Elias's jaw tightened. And what they want is to use you, to hurt you, to turn you into something you're not, he said. I won't let that happen. A sudden boom echoed through the hallway, louder than before, followed by shouts of, they breached the outer wall, and the distant roar of weapons fire lit the horizon through the narrow window, red flashes slicing across the sky like bleeding comets. Soldiers rushed past the door carrying rifles and energy shields, their faces pale but determined. One of them halted before Elias and saluted quickly. Captain, enemy troops spotted heading toward the medical sector. We need to evacuate now. Price pushed a small device into Elias's hand, a sleek portable shield generator. You'll need this, he said, then looked at Lyra. Stay close to him and don't fall behind. Lyra nodded weakly, wiping her tears with a trembling hand, her glowing patterns flickering as if reacting to her panic. Elias noticed the light pulsing faster beneath her skin, a soft but growing hum surrounding her. What's happening to her? He asked quietly. Lyra looked down at her arms as the glow intensified. When I'm frightened, the energy inside me reacts. I cannot control it. It reaches out like a signal. Price's expression darkened. That's how the Varric are tracking her. She's like a beacon, Lyra gasped, covering her mouth, guilt and fear twisting across her face. I'm putting everyone in danger, she whispered. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be alive, Elias stepped in front of her, lifting her chin gently so she looked at him. His voice low and steady. Listen to me, Lyra. Your life is not a mistake and you're not a burden. You're a survivor. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Drawn to the calm strength in his eyes, another explosion hit closer this time, the hallway lights flickering violently, dust falling from the ceiling as the entire structure trembled. Lyra flinched and grabbed Elias's arm tightly. Her grip desperate and cold, Price swung the door open. Move, both of you, now, he ordered. Elias wrapped an arm around Lyra protectively and followed the commander into the corridor, alarms painting red light across the metal walls, the air thick with smoke and the echoes of distant battle. Terrified civilians ran in the opposite direction as soldiers rushed toward the fight. As they moved, a sudden electric hum filled the corridor. The lights above them crackling, Lyra stopped mid-step. Her breath catching in her chest, Elias felt her body tense under his arm. What is it? He asked. She turned slowly, her glowing eyes widening with dread. They're here, she whispered, her voice shaking like a leaf in a storm. I can feel them. They are close. Too close. Elias tightened his hold on her and stepped in front of her instinctively, his muscles tensing even though he was still weakened from injuries. The commander looked ahead with grim certainty. Down the long corridor, the shadows shifted as armored Varric soldiers stepped into view, their dark bodies tall and jagged, eyes burning with cold predatory hunger. They had found her. Lyra's breath trembled against Elias's arm as he reached for the shield device. Activating it with a sharp snap of light, the energy field burst open around them just as the first Varric raised its weapon. The corridor erupted into chaos, and Elias knew with fierce clarity that this was only the beginning. The corridor exploded with light as the Varric opened fire, streams of red energy tearing through the air with a sharp hiss. Elias pulled Lyra behind him and the portable shield flared bright, its curved barrier absorbing the first wave of impact with a deep, trembling hum. The force pushed him back a step, but he held firm, teeth clenched, heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. The Varric advanced with slow, predatory confidence, their armored bodies towering, their breathing harsh and metallic, each step echoing like a countdown to something terrible. Lyra clutched Elias's arm tightly, her glowing skin flickering in panic, her energy reacting to fear, casting faint waves of pale light onto the walls. Commander Price shouted orders. Soldiers ran past them, firing bursts of blue plasma. The hallway filled with chaos, smoke rising, alarms screaming, the cold metal shaking beneath their feet, the entire colony trembling under the force of invasion. Elias stepped forward, pushing Lyra gently behind a fallen medical unit, keeping her sheltered while he stood between her and the charging Varric. A blast hit the shield again, sparks flying across Elias's vision, pain stabbing through his recovering ribs, his breath trembling for a moment before he forced himself steady. Move back, Price called. We need to fall to Sector 9. That's the only route still open, but Elias didn't move yet. Lyra's wide, fearful eyes were locked on him as if he was the last star left in her darkening sky. The Varric roared in their guttural language, and one of them charged with blade-like limbs extended. Elias deactivated the shield at the last second and rolled aside, grabbing the fallen rifle from a downed soldier. The weapon heavy but familiar in his hands, he fired point blank, the energy bolt slamming into the alien's chest and sending it crashing backward with a furious scream. The corridor shook again as more Varric forced their way through a breached wall, sharp claws scraping metal, their glowing red eyes locking immediately onto Lyra. She gasped and instinctively backed away, her hands rising defensively as the energy in her blood pulsed brighter. Elias saw it like a heartbeat of light beneath her skin, a power she didn't understand and couldn't control. He rushed to her side, pulling her up. "Stay with me," he breathed, and she nodded with a trembling whisper. "I'm trying." They ran with Price and the soldiers toward the lower sectors, boots pounding on metal, distant explosions shaking dust from the ceiling. Lyra stumbled once. Elias caught her instantly, his hand steady at her back, his voice soft even in the chaos. "I've got you. Don't look behind," but she couldn't help it. The distant red glow of the Varric eyes haunted her every step. As they turned a corner, another squad of colony defenders clashed with Varric troops, the firefight lighting the entire passage in violent colors, screams echoing as the colony's brave soldiers fought desperately to slow the enemy advance. Elias felt a growing anger burn in his chest, not for the battle, but for the way the Varric kept aiming only at Lyra, Ignoring everyone else, hunting her like a prize animal, Price activated a heavy barrier door, shouting for the last soldiers to fall back. The metal wall lowered slowly, grinding loudly as sparks rained down from damaged circuits. "Hurry!" he yelled. "Once this shuts, it won't open again." But as Lyra and Elias reached the barrier, the ground quaked and a massive Varric captain stepped into the hallway they came from, its armor black and sharp like mineral blades, its voice vibrating the air as it pointed directly at Lyra. "There," it growled. The Starbearer. Lyra froze, her entire body trembling violently, her glowing markings brightening against her skin. Elias grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the closing barrier. But the Varric captain raised a massive weapon and fired a scorching beam that ripped across the metal floor, blasting away debris and sending Elias stumbling. Lyra fell with him, but before the alien could fire again, Price emptied an entire rifle charge at it, buying precious seconds through the door. "Now!" Price shouted, his voice strained. Elias pulled Lyra through just as the captain lunged forward, but the barrier came down with a deafening clang, cutting off the alien's advance. The metal glowed red where its claws struck the other side, the captain's roar vibrating through the door like thunder trapped behind steel. Lyra collapsed to her knees, her breath shaking, her hands trembling against her chest, the glow beneath her skin swirling uncontrollably. Elias knelt beside her, pulling her gently into his arms as she tried to steady her breathing. "I can't stop it," she whispered. "It feels like something inside me wants to break free." "I don't know what it is." Elias held her close, his voice low, steady, protective. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Price exhaled heavily and looked down the next hallway, his face grim. "They called you Starbearer," he said slowly. "What does that mean?" Lyra swallowed hard, fear tightening her voice. "It means they know what I am, and they will not stop until they take me." Elias brushed her hair gently from her face, his voice firm and unwavering. "Then let them come, because they'll have to go through me first outside." The colony shook under another barrage from the Varric ships, the war thundering closer and deep inside the trembling halls. Elias felt the storm tightening around them, a battle for more than survival, a battle for one frightened girl carrying a power no one understood, and a destiny she never asked for. The dim light of Sector 9 flickered like a dying heartbeat as Elias guided Lyra through the narrow passage, every wall trembling under distant explosions. The colony felt smaller with every step, as if the metal around them was shrinking while the Varric presence grew heavier in the air. Lyra's breathing was uneven, her glowing skin shifting with waves of light she couldn't control, each pulse brighter than the last. Elias kept his hand on her back, steady and warm, grounding her whenever her fear threatened to take hold. They reached a small maintenance room where the rumbling softened. Commander Price sealed the door behind them, locking out the sounds of chaos for a brief, fragile moment. The sudden quiet made Lyra tremble harder, her hands pressing against her chest as if trying to hold something inside. Elias knelt in front of her, gently lifting her chin so her eyes met his. "You're safe here, breathe with me," he whispered, his voice steady and warm. She tried, but her breath kept catching, her glowing markings flickering in rapid bursts. "It's growing," she whispered shakily. "It feels like something is waking up inside me. Something I can't control." Price watched with a troubled look. "We need to understand what the Varric meant by Starbearer," he said quietly. "Why would they risk an entire fleet for one untrained girl?" Lyra closed her eyes, and for a moment Elias thought she couldn't speak. But then her voice came out soft and trembling. "When I was little, the elders spoke of old stories before my people were wiped out. They said we once carried the light of the stars in our blood, a gift from the first ancestors who walked through the cosmic storms. Those with the brightest markings were called Starbearers. They could sense energy, shape it, call it, bend it. But the Varric slaughtered us because they feared that power." Elias felt a cold shiver run through him, realizing the truth she carried wasn't just myth, but something deeper, something that pulsed inside her like a sleeping fire. "You never learned how to use it," he said gently. She shook her head, tears forming in her glowing eyes. "I never wanted to. The elders hid me. The council hid me. Everyone wanted to protect me or use me, but no one taught me how to be myself." The room trembled again as a distant blast shook the lower levels. Dust falling from overhead pipes, Elias wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. She leaned into him without resisting her trembling fingers, gripping the fabric of his shirt as if it were the only solid thing left in her world. Price paced the room, worry tightening each step. They're not just here to capture her, he muttered. They want to use her, or destroy her if they can't control her. Lyra's voice broke as she whispered, "If they take me, the colony will fall. If they kill me, the colony will still suffer." Elias held her shoulders firmly, forcing her eyes to meet his again. "Lyra, look at me," he said, his voice deep and steady. "You are not a weapon and you are not a curse. You are a person who survived what no one else did. Nothing about that is your fault." Her breath shook as she whispered, "Why do you keep helping me?" "I don't understand." He brushed a strand of her glowing hair aside, his hand gentle against her cheek. "Because you deserve to be helped. You deserve to live without chains." A loud metallic crack echoed through the hallway outside the door, followed by heavy footsteps, the kind that made the air vibrate. Price moved instantly to the control panel, checking the readings, his eyes narrowing. "They're cutting through the bulkheads," he said urgently. "They found our location." Lyra flinched as another shockwave shook the walls, her markings bursting with light, casting brilliant reflections across the metal floor. Elias felt the energy around her like a warm wind, even though she wasn't touching him. It was growing stronger, more alive, more desperate. "Captain," Price said, turning to Elias, "we can't outrun them anymore. If the Varric get to her while she's panicking like this, she won't stand a chance. She needs to understand what she can do." Lyra shook her head violently, fear flooding her voice. "I can't control it. If I try, it will hurt people. It will hurt you." Elias took both her hands gently in his, feeling the warmth of her pulse mixed with the trembling energy beneath her skin. "Listen to me," he whispered. "You saved civilians during the attack without even knowing how. You shielded them. That wasn't destruction. That was protection. Your power isn't meant to hurt people. It's meant to save them." Her lips parted in surprise, as if no one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever believed in her strength instead of fearing it. The footsteps outside grew louder, sharp metallic strides of Varric soldiers getting closer. Price raised his weapon, preparing for the inevitable breach. The lights flickered again as the doorframe began to glow red from heat. Lyra's fear peaked and her markings flared bright enough to illuminate the entire room, the air around her vibrating gently like a living pulse. Elias kept holding her hands, grounding her, steadying her. "You're not alone," he whispered. "I'm right here." The door buckled inward with a deafening groan, metal tearing as the Varric forced their way through, their red eyes blazing with hunger and certainty. They reached out toward Lyra, as if claiming what they believed was theirs. Lyra inhaled sharply and the room erupted with a burst of radiant energy, a wave of luminous force expanding outward from her trembling form. The Varric soldiers staggered, shields cracking, armor glowing from the sudden impact of her untamed power. Elias shielded her with his body even as the light washed over him, his heart pounding with equal parts fear and awe. She was no longer a frightened girl hiding in shadows. She was something ancient awakening, something powerful, something the Varric feared with reason. And as the light faded, she collapsed into Elias's arms, trembling like a fallen star trying to find its place in the sky once more. The light faded slowly like a dying star, and the room settled into a trembling stillness. Lyra lay in Elias's arms, breathing in weak, shallow bursts, her glowing markings dimming with every second as if the energy inside her had burned too bright. Elias held her tighter, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his palm. The Varric soldiers who had forced their way in were sprawled across the floor, stunned by the wave she had released. Cracked armor steaming, their red eyes flickering with confusion instead of rage. Commander Price wasted no time dragging one of the stunned aliens aside and sealing the doorway with emergency clamps. But his breath shook slightly and sweat glistened on his brow. Even he had not expected a power like the one he had just witnessed. "We can't stay here," he said in a low, urgent voice. "They'll regroup and come again. Stronger this time, they'll send their captain or worse." Elias nodded and gently lifted Lyra to her feet. She wavered unsteadily, her legs weak, her head leaning against his shoulder as she whispered, "I didn't mean to release so much. I just didn't want them to take me." Her voice broke into a trembling breath and Elias brushed a comforting hand along her back. "You did nothing wrong," he murmured. "You protected us all." But even as he spoke, he could feel heat radiating from her skin, not painful but unnaturally warm. Like a fire lived beneath her surface and was struggling to calm itself. She closed her eyes and held on to him as if afraid she might collapse again. Price checked the scanner on his wrist and his expression darkened as red blips multiplied across the display. "They're surrounding the lower levels," he said. "The only way out is upward toward the central tower." If we reach the hangar, we can launch a small strike craft, but we'll have to pass through 3 more sectors. Elias tightened his grip on Lyra's hand and she squeezed back weakly, her fingers cold with fear. "I'll follow you," she whispered. "I won't slow you down." He met her eyes and saw pain there and courage, and something deeper growing between the fear and the desperation, something that made his chest ache. "Just stay with me," he replied softly. "That's all I need." They moved into the next hallway as the colony shook from another blast, sparks raining from broken lights, thick smoke drifting like dark clouds clinging to the ceiling. They ducked beneath fallen beams and past injured civilians who stared with wide, terrified eyes, some recognizing Elias and reaching out in hope, others pulling away when they saw Lyra's glowing skin, unsure whether she was salvation or danger. Lyra noticed every frightened glance and her shoulders curled inward, guilt settling into her expression like a shadow. Elias squeezed her hand again, forcing her eyes toward him. "Don't look at them," he whispered. "Look at me." She nodded quietly and kept close, their steps moving in sync as if tied by an invisible thread. They reached a platform overlooking the central bay where fires burned across the lower decks and squads of human soldiers fought desperately against the advancing Varric line, red energy bolts streaking through the air like burning comets, the sound of war crashing into the metal walls with brutal force. Price pointed to a narrow maintenance bridge stretching across to the stairwell. "That's our way up," he said. "But we need to move fast." They stepped onto the bridge, but halfway across a deafening roar shook the entire sector. A hulking Varric warbeast leaped from the shadows, landing on the far end of the walkway, its armored limbs crushing the metal beneath it, its eyes glowing like burning coals fixed on Lyra with savage hunger. She stumbled back, fear freezing her in place. Elias stepped in front of her, instantly raising his rifle and firing a burst that struck the creature's chest but barely slowed it. The beast roared again and lunged forward, shaking the entire bridge. Price fired as well, shouting, "Elias, get her across." But the beast slammed its massive arm downward and split the bridge in 2, sending metal screaming apart. Elias grabbed Lyra, pulling her away as the walkway fell beneath their feet. They leaped onto a dangling support beam, the shock jarring Elias's ribs painfully. Lyra slipped, but Elias caught her waist with both hands, holding her close as debris rained around them. Below them, flames burned in pools of exposed wiring and broken platforms. She clung to him, trembling violently, whispering, I'm sorry. They keep coming because of me." He lifted her chin, forcing her eyes to meet his despite the chaos. "Listen to me," he said with fierce, steady fire. "You are not causing this. They are choosing violence. Not you." Her breath shook at his words, and something softened in her expression, a fragile strength flickering through the fear. Price swung onto another beam and reached for them. "Jump!" he shouted. Now, Elias wrapped an arm under Lyra's legs, lifting her against his chest, and jumped toward the next stable platform. They landed hard but safely, Lyra gasping as she gripped his shirt, her markings flickering from the shock. Above them, the war beast clawed its way upward, but soldiers on the higher platforms unleashed a barrage of fire, driving it back. The explosions lit the bay in a harsh red glow, revealing the scale of destruction across the colony. Elias set Lyra down gently, and she leaned into him for balance, the warmth of her energy settling again, though still unsteady. Price pointed toward the stairwell. "Come on," he said breathlessly. "The hangar is 2 levels up. If we reach it, we can escape this entire sector." Lyra touched Elias's hand softly, her voice faint but steady. "If we go to the hangar, the Varric will follow. They won't stop until they destroy the whole colony. This won't end unless we end it." Price paused, realizing the truth in her words, his face tightening with the weight of a difficult decision. Elias looked at her and saw something new in her eyes. Not fear, not guilt, but the beginning of resolve. "What are you saying?" he asked quietly. She took a slow breath, her markings glowing softly like stars returning after a storm. "I need to face them," she whispered. "Not as a slave, not as prey, but as what I truly am." Elias felt his heart beat harder as she stepped closer, her hand sliding into his with quiet trust. "And I need you with me," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion and something deeper. The colony shook again beneath them, louder than before, the Varric drawing closer, and Elias knew there was no turning back. Whatever she was becoming, whatever destiny waited beyond the rising smoke, he would face it with her. Always. The hangar doors shook under the impact of distant blasts, their metal frames groaning like they might collapse at any second. Elias held Lyra close as they ran toward the small strike craft waiting at the far end, her glowing skin pulsing faintly with every hurried step, a rhythm like the heartbeat of a frightened world. Below them, the colony burned in angry bursts of light, smoke curling upward as red energy streaked across the walls. The distant roar of Varric ships filled the air, a terrifying reminder that time was running out. Lyra stumbled, her legs weak from exhaustion and fear. Elias caught her instantly, wrapping his arm firmly around her. "Stay with me," he said, voice low and urgent. "We're almost there." Her hands clung to his shirt as if letting go would mean falling into the abyss, and her voice trembled. "I don't want to fail again, Elias." "I can't." "You won't," he said firmly, meeting her eyes, the glow of her markings reflecting in his determined gaze. "You've already saved more than you realize. You're not failing, you're surviving. And that's more than enough." They rounded the last corner into the hangar, the small craft waiting like a fragile promise, its engines humming faintly, ready to launch. But before they could reach it, the Varric commander appeared, taller and darker than any Elias had seen, eyes blazing with hatred and certainty, its claws slicing the air with deadly precision. Lyra froze, a wave of fear washing over her, her glowing patterns flaring bright as if the energy inside her was responding to the threat instinctively. Elias stepped in front of her, rifle raised. But he knew weapons alone would not stop this. The creature advanced, red eyes locked on Lyra. "Its intentions clear," Elias whispered. "You can do this. Trust yourself." His hand gripping hers tightly, grounding her, giving her courage. Lyra inhaled sharply, and the energy inside her burst outward, light exploding in waves that rippled through the hangar. Varric soldiers thrown back by the force, alarms blaring as the energy swept across the metal walls, scorching, pulsing, alive. Elias felt it wash over him like warm wind, a power raw and beautiful, frightening and protective all at once. The commander roared and lunged, but Lyra moved, almost dancing between the bursts of her own energy, her hands raised instinctively, drawing the light and shaping it into shields, waves of force colliding with the alien attacker. Elias fired when he could, but the main work was hers, and he knew it. Each pulse of energy that radiated from her made her markings glow brighter, casting shimmering reflections across the hangar, and with every movement she seemed to gain control, her fear slowly giving way to determination, the first true spark of mastery over what had terrified her for so long. The Varric commander roared again, striking with claws and brute strength, but Lyra's energy flared, sending the creature stumbling backward, sparks flying from its armor, and for a moment, Elias thought it might actually pause. Stunned by what it was witnessing, Elias grabbed her hand again, guiding her toward the small craft, the engines humming louder as they approached. But another squad of Varric soldiers appeared, cutting off the rest of the hangar. Their red eyes fixed, their weapons ready, the final obstacle before escape. Lyra looked at Elias, fear and resolve flickering in her eyes. "I can stop them, I can," she whispered, voice strong despite exhaustion. "I won't let them touch the colony, not anymore." Elias nodded, heart pounding. "Then do it," he said softly. "I'll cover you." She raised her hands and the light pulsed outward, an unstoppable wave of energy. Waves cascading through the hangar, shields crackling, Varric soldiers thrown back or frozen mid-step. The commander struggling to maintain balance as energy spiraled around him, and Elias watched in awe as Lyra, trembling and terrified, became something magnificent, something that carried the weight of her people, her ancestors, and her own survival. With one final surge, the light flared blindingly, and the Varric commander screamed, retreating into the shadows as the force pushed all remaining soldiers back, clearing the path to the craft. Elias rushed to Lyra's side, holding her steady, her chest heaving with rapid breaths, tears in her glowing eyes. "You did it," he whispered, voice thick with relief and awe. "You saved us." She shook her head, trying to steady herself. "I couldn't have without you," she said softly, voice quivering. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." He smiled, a slow release of tension in his chest, wrapping her in a protective embrace. "We did it together," he said firmly, "and now we finish this. Together." They reached the craft, engines whirring to life, the hangar doors beginning to close behind them as the last Varric forces retreated, unwilling or unable to pass through Lyra's energy again. Inside the cockpit, Lyra collapsed into the seat, exhaustion and relief washing over her. Elias strapped himself beside her, watching her carefully, his hand resting lightly over hers, their fingers entwined, grounding them both in the calm after chaos. Price entered moments later, checking systems and weapons. "Elias, Lyra, we're clear for launch, but the Varric fleet won't give up." This is only the beginning. Lyra's gaze met Elias's, glowing faintly yet steady, her fear now tempered with courage. "I'm ready," she whispered, and for the first time, Elias saw not a frightened girl kneeling before him but a warrior, a protector, a star-bearer fully awake. He nodded, heart pounding. "Then let's go home." The engines roared, the craft lifted, blasting through the hangar doors as the colony shrank behind them, fires and smoke still painting the world red and gold. But the two of them sat together side by side, the weight of what had passed slowly giving way to hope. And as the stars stretched out before them, endless and cold, Lyra leaned slightly into him, whispering softly, "Thank you, human, for giving me my life." Elias squeezed her hand gently, the first real smile crossing his face in days. "No," he said softly. "Thank you for showing me what courage really looks like." The colony, scarred but alive, disappeared behind them, the threat of the Varric still out there, but the future for the first time felt wide open, full of light, and full of the promise that they would face it together, free, unbroken and unstoppable.